Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, who comes straight out of a DC comic villain universe, is no more. He has officially resigned from the WEF. It's being widely reported that Klaus Schwab, an otherwise obscure mechanical engineer who founded one of the most sinister and influential world government organizations on the planet, the WEF, has officially stepped down as executive chairman of the organization. It was a stunning announcement. Schwab has been the head of the WEF ever since he founded it back in the early 1970s. The global news platform Semaphore originally broke the story on Schwab, who is now 86 years old, stepping down as executive chairman after they obtained an email he sent out to staff earlier this morning. Schwab has yet to name his successor, but he did say that the WEF's executive board is now being led by a fellow by the name of Borg Brende, who is the current president of the WEF. And it's being widely reported that Schwab, like Soros, has a number of his family members embedded in leadership positions throughout the organization. So we're certainly not going to be seeing anything drastically new in terms of a change of direction or anything like that for the WEF. But Schwab stepping down certainly is an end to an era, and yet another end at that. You may remember that George Soros recently stepped down from his Open Society foundations and turned them over to his son, Alex, announced shortly thereafter that the Open Society foundations were instituting mass layoffs. The foundations cut almost half of their global workforce, and shortly thereafter, it was announced that the Open Society foundations were indeed leaving Europe altogether. They publicly announced that they were significantly reducing all operations throughout the European Union. So something seems to be going on here. These resignations may indeed indicate something far more significant happening here. But first, gang, do you ever wonder how Nancy Pelosi seems to know exactly when to buy certain stocks? How politicians in general seem to have secret knowledge of what stocks are poised to surge on the market? Of course, it's called insider trading. Pelosi and her cronies have been getting away with it for years. But guess what? You and I actually have access to that very same inside information. Thanks to a little SEC loophole, we can track what the big corporate CEOs are buying up in real time, and then we can ride their coattails into financial success legally and ethically. Once you learn the secret of the trade, you're in. To do that, you've got to join me along with my good friend and trading expert Ross Givens this Thursday, May 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern. Ross is the real deal. His insider tips have led to returns that have hit nearly 1,500%. It's going to be huge, but seating is limited. Click on that link below and snag one of the remaining seats. This promises to change your life, gang. You can't afford to miss it. Click on that link below right now. Some months back, the New York Times ran a piece admitting that the days of the WEF are indeed coming to an end. And this is simply because the world is changing. And it's changing in ways that threaten to bring to an end the very existence of the WEF itself. The WEF, according to the New York Times piece, is losing its relevance. It's losing its influence, its power to direct and dictate political and economic life around the world. And this is largely because more and more populations are deliberately turning away from globalism and globalist structures and goals, and are instead embracing nationalism, populism, and traditionalism. As many of you know, the European farmers' protest continues to surge throughout the continent in protests against WEF-inspired rules, regulations, and trade deals that are adversely affecting their livelihood and their ability to farm. The protests have amassed in Brussels, the seat of the EU, where numerous tractors and trucks have sealed off streets close to the European headquarters in order to pressure the EU's agricultural ministers to back off from these draconian environmental regulations. And they've been very successful in doing precisely that. A major European Union plan to impose more radical climate restrictions on the farmers has been officially dropped. Environmentalists were recently stunned to find out that a so-called biodiversity bill that was expected to easily clear all bureaucratic and legislative hurdles was actually stopped dead in its tracks, and largely, of course, because of the effectiveness of these protests throughout the continent. But this is precisely what the New York Times is getting at. The world is changing, and it's changing in ways that are leaving the WEF behind. There was a time when the WEF was able to far more effectively institute its agenda. The WEF, we have to understand, is a thoroughly modernist organization that depends on globalist technocratic societies to institute its policies. So if you don't know, the WEF is all about what's called stakeholder capitalism, right? That goes all the way back to Klaus Schwab's original book he wrote back in the 1970s entitled Modern Enterprise Management. And that introduced this key concept for Schwab, stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is a system in which corporations are deputized by governments to serve the interests of the government. Now, of course, they'll claim that it's about serving the general population at large, right? Because they're saying, we're all stakeholders in the end, aren't we? We're all stakeholders in a far more just, fair, equitable, and sustainable society. But in the end, stakeholder capitalism involves instituting what's called ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance criteria. And that refers to scores that corporations get in relation to those key areas so that investors can show they're investing in companies that advance left-wing social justice goals. And that includes green energy, racial equity, even often abortion access. It's basically the attempt to pressure companies to become more and more woke. And many have noticed that the ESG scores are eerily similar to China's social credit system, which is, of course, a technocratic project that seeks to control human behavior so as to, quote, maximize safety and sustainability. But it's now being widely recognized that the demons and devils of the WEF are actively designing and seeking to implement the architecture of just such an internationalized social credit system, all in the name of a radically apocalyptic environmentalist vision where they actively believe that your consumption choices have the capacity to destroy the planet and life as we know it. And so that, in effect, is what the WEF is all about. It's all about, in the end, controlling your consumer choices so as to make sure you don't destroy the planet and that you promote social and cultural left-wing equity. What the New York Times is pointing out here is that less and less governments are playing along with that. The massive populist revolt, the civilizationalist populist revolt that we're seeing all throughout Europe is basically slamming the door shut on these stakeholder capitalist initiatives. George Soros has been finding this out the hard way with his Open Society foundations, and now it appears that Klaus Schwab is finding this out the hard way with his WEF. The world is turning its back on these globalist institutions. It really is the end of an era, and we can all say, thank God for that.
Here's your opportunity to tell big tech tyrants where they can stick it. Click on that link below and download our brand new cancel-proof Turley Talks app, and you can sign our special declaration of restoration. That's our petition to big tech that declares a new day is dawned. They are no longer in control, and we are taking our nation back. We've already got over 1,000 signatures of courageous patriots, and yours is next. Click on that link below or go to fight.turleytalks.com right now.